What is this? What is that dangly thing at the back of your throat? And how will understanding it improve your American English accent?
With the thoughts I'd be thinking I could be another Lincoln if I only had a brain.
So in this video, I'll answer those questions as well as explain the most common mistakes that non-native English speakers make with this piece of the anatomy. I'll teach you how anyone can learn one simple trick to avoid that mistake. But first, let's look at some examples of what could happen if you struggle to use this part of the anatomy for a particular sound in English, and why it even matters. Let's consider a few sets of words in English. Coffin and coughing. They have very different meanings. One refers to the place of putting a corpse.
Get 3 coffins ready.
And the other is when you're sick, you're coughing. Done and dung. Done meaning you've completed everything.
I'm done with you.
Oh, that's nice.
Whereas dung has an entirely different meaning.
Ew.
Raisin versus raising. One being a food and one being an action. Of course, context can help in a lot of situations, but we all know those really interesting moments when context just doesn't help.
What did that just mean?
And this confusion makes life difficult. We've all been there. I recently had a client come to me complaining about having difficulty with those exact word pairs. And I explained to her that English differentiates between the N sound, n, and the NG sound, n. They're produced in entirely different parts of the mouth and using entirely different parts of the anatomy. She was shocked to hear this, but once she mastered it, most of her English pronunciation issues were fixed. The ing sound in English is produced with the back of the tongue. The back of the tongue raises up to the soft palate and makes contact. At the same time, that hangy ball, also known as the uvula or the palatine uvula, falls low. Now, the roof of your mouth is comprised of the hard palate. That's that hard portion if you place your tongue up on the top of your mouth. And as you feel further back, you'll notice that the tissue becomes softer. That's the soft palate. As the soft palate ends into the velum, the very last portion, that hangy ball, is called the uvula. The velum and uvula are made of connective tissue and small muscle fibers as well as some salivary glands. The velum and the uvula are like a doorway. They can move up to close the door to the nasal passage. This shuts the door so that no air can come out of the nose. And we raise the velum to close that little nose door for most consonants and our vowels in English. The velum and the uvula are lowered to open the door to the nose. And that way, air can escape out of the nose for nasal sounds. And in English, this only occurs for 3 sounds: N, N, M, M, and ng, the NG sound. The velum has a couple other purposes as well. It helps to initiate the gag reflex. It helps to play a role in preventing choking. The sounds that we make when we either gargle or when we snore have an element of the velum vibrating against the pharyngeal wall behind it. It keeps our voice and our speech from sounding hypernasal. It also has salivary glands to help us for swallowing. And as we swallow, the velum and uvula move up to close the nose door, and you guessed it, to help us not have food and liquids come out of our nose. It's a good thing. I'm glad we have it. So how do we control the velum? When producing that NG sound, the back of the tongue and the velum touch together and the soft palate as well. So there's a closing contact at the back of your oral cavity. And just as you would use the back of your tongue for the K sound, k, 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 and the G sound, g, 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 notice how the tip of your tongue is not involved. It's not raised in any way. It's just hanging out at the bottom of your mouth, doing nothing. And also notice as you create that sound, our voice is on. Our vocal folds are vibrating. But the air is closed out of the oral cavity. No air can escape. Our velum is down, it allows air out our nose. So feel that there's air coming out of the nose. And how do you know if you're doing it right? You can feel warm airflow coming through the nose, or you could even test it by plugging your nose and seeing if that stops the sound. If it does, that means air was trying to get out, and this plugged it up. So how is N different from NG? For the N sound, the tip of the tongue is pushed up towards the alveolar ridge or the hard palate, right behind your front top teeth. What's really happening is the tip of your tongue and even a bit of the sides are closing the door of your mouth or your oral cavity. You're creating a seal with your tongue tip right at the front, so no air can come out of your mouth anymore. And that leaves no air to escape out the mouth, so it has to come out of the nose. And as you might have guessed, that means the velum has to be down to allow that door to stay open and let the air out. So let's feel for yourself as you create an N, feel how your tongue tip is involved. And for NG, feel how the back of your tongue is involved. Now let's look at some examples of why this is so important that you can differentiate between these two sounds in your speech. Because this impacts the meaning of what you're saying. Lion with an N. Lying with an NG. Ran with an N. Rang with an NG. Let's look at some more pairs. Win versus wing. Ton versus tongue. Ban versus bang. Thin versus thing. Garden versus guarding. Taken versus taking. Fan versus fang. Go in versus going. Gone versus gong. Hun versus hung. Notice for the N, my jaw tends to be closed and my mouth is a bit more closed because my tongue tip has to do the work. For NG, my mouth is slightly more open because mostly the back of my tongue is doing its job. And definitely subscribe if you like videos like this and you don't want to miss out on information about the American English accent. So what are the most common mistakes someone might have with this sound? Depending on your first language, a few issues might arise with these two different sounds. First, you might substitute all those NG sounds with an N, using the tip of your tongue instead. So when trying to say sing, it will sound like you're saying sin. And if you sung a song, you might just be saying the word sun instead. Another issue that often arises is that all of the N's are substituted with an NG, so the exact reverse. So the word kin might sound like king, or the word run might sound like wrong. And words like in and on might sound more like ing and ong. And the third issue is that you might produce somewhere between an N and an NG in your pronunciation. So it's neither an N or an NG, it is more the middle of your tongue going up close to the roof and your velum is lowered. So the resulting sound is neither an N or an ng, it's somewhere in between. And in the comments below, which of those three issues do you think you have? You can write 1, 2, or 3. I'm quite curious to see what the biggest issue is amongst you guys, my friends. So how can you avoid this mistake with one simple trick? Easy. The first thing to try is just to use the back of your tongue. But if me just telling you to do that doesn't quite work, it's not enough, then try to use the G sound, g, g, g. And most languages have this sound. If you use the G sound, you can actually feel the back of your tongue touching the soft palate. Now, go to make the G sound, but don't make any sound at all. Just the position of a G. Feel how the back of your tongue is right up against the roof and it's closed off in the back of the mouth. The tip of the tongue's just hanging low. Now you're going to hum, but keep your lips apart. Voila, you have the sound. So when do we use this sound in English anyway? This is the sound you make when you see words that end in ing, ong, ung. Let's take a look. Words like pudding, going, laughing, and eating. And very rarely is this sound in the middle of words. Even if you see an ng in the middle of words, notice how there is no here. It is a true N with a G. Let's take a look. Notice how there is no back of the tongue sound in these words. Danger, plunger, stingy, stranger. When you see an E at the end of an NG word, that does change things, so be aware. Let's look at some examples. Orange, challenge, change, and lounge. These all have N with a J or soft G sound. So these are exceptions that you should be aware of and not to overgeneralize this sound in the middle of words and words that end in E. Another really cool thing about the NG sound is that when we speak, we do things called assimilations, where the sound changes because of rapid conversation. So I'll give you some examples of words that have the NG in the middle, which typically would be the ng sound, but an assimilation occurs. So a word like angle, where typically the pronunciation should be an N to the G, angle. We use a process called anticipatory assimilation. This just means that we anticipate that the back of our tongue will eventually need to go up for that G sound. So the tongue anticipates that movement. The result of anticipating that is that the N begins to be produced a little bit further back because it's easier to transition to that G. So instead of using the tip of your tongue for the NG, we now end up using more of the back of the tongue, and it's the ng. So we end up saying ng. The N is skipped altogether. You'll see that in examples like this. Angle, hanger, longer, stronger, wrangle, finger, penguin, linger, mingle, tangle, tingle, dangle, single, and jingle. So again, instead of the true N, it's kind of an evolution of anticipating the back of the tongue going up. There is a true as well as a full hard G. So once my client understood the difference between the N and NG sound, she immediately understood what was going wrong for her. And she began to practice my steps and achieving fluency in her conversations. And if you're at this point in the video and you're still watching, then I'm going to guess that you want that kind of fluency for yourself too. You can either go to proactivepronunciation.com for my course, or click this video to learn how to practice what you just learned. And if you're still wondering, is it even possible to change my accent? Then click on this video because I'll explain what actually is possible. I'll see you there. Bye.